we think in terms of millions of years, which is one of the reasons why you should never loan a geologist any money. We'll pay you back in millions of years. But most of the geology of our area dates back about 250 to 200 million years ago. Ramapo Mountains are much older. They formed about 1 billion years ago. And over these, we have much younger deposits, which were formed during the Ice Age. So what became our area started about 1 billion years ago during a collision of an ancient mountain range with a pre-North American continent called Rodinia. It formed what are known as the Grenville Mountains. And the streams gradually eroded them to the current Ramapo Mountains. And they filled in a large downdrop block with sediments. And occasionally inside the sediments, there were lava flows. Much of the sediments were covered by shallow lakes, and in the lakes there were fish. So these are some of the fossil fish that were discovered in places like North Bergen. But we also had invertebrates in the lower right-hand side. These markings that you see are actually burrows from worms that dug their way through the mud when it was a shallow lake. And all of these critters were trying to avoid getting stomped on by dinosaurs. These are some of the footprints of dinosaurs that were preserved in the muds. So about 250 million years ago, North America began to separate from Africa and Europe. And our region is sometimes called the Newark Basin. It's the largest of about 14 basins that run along the east coast of North America. Goes basically from Rockland County out towards Gettysburg. And the lava flows in some places came up above the surface. These are the ones that we call the Watchung Mountains over by Patterson. But we also had some lava flows that stayed beneath the surface, and they became the Palisades. And I'm almost finished with that part of the geology, so we can get back to some other things. But just want to let you all know that at some point in the past, and I haven't been able to determine exactly when, the Hudson River, instead of flowing down as it does now through the Tappan Zee, up near Spark Hill, just below the Tappan Zee Bridge, cut through the Palisades rocks and came down through our area and cut out the rocks which are beneath the Hackensack River and in the Hackensack Meadowlands. This ancient Hudson River went down below Staten Island and then curved around and came into New York Bay. The other thing that's important to know about our region is that in the past, as the ice ages occurred, they pushed like giant bulldozers and built up piles of debris, which became Long Island and also Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, Buzzards Bay. And when the ice melted beyond these, it formed huge lakes. Let me go back a moment. Some of these lakes we know were about 200 feet deep. And annually, as the spring came, the streams would increase their flow and bring in thicker sediments. So we had annual layers like tree rings. These are called varves. And they built up thick deposits. In the 1920s, the geologists counted the varves in the clay pits at Little Ferry, and found that the lake had existed for more than 2,500 years. I just mentioned that the clay was used to make bricks. So this is a picture of the Little Ferry brickyards sometime in the 19th century. And the remnants of them form some lakes which are in Little Ferry that some of you may know about. But this is the Hackensack River along here. Some of the schooners, which were the main ways of getting the bricks in and out in a time when there was only dirt roads. As I mentioned, there were lakes that formed behind it. And many of us live in what's called Glacial Lake Hackensack, which started up in Rockland County, was behind the Palisades, went down into the Meadowlands. On the other side of the Palisades, covering parts of New York City, we had something called Glacial Lake Flushing, and farther north, Glacial Lake Hudson. And to the west, where the Passaic River is, we have Glacial Lake Passaic. And wandering around as the Ice Age ended were these mastodons. I don't know if any of you remember the old Bergen County Museum in Paramus, but this was a mural that was on the wall in the Bergen County Museum. These are some of the bones of some of the oldest residents of Bergen County. And in March 1974, we had an opportunity to dig up a mastodon. I'm holding one of the femurs in this picture. These are some of the ribs and some of the vertebrae and some of the discs. So this was basically where Harrington Park and close to Norwood come together at the edge of the Oradell Reservoir. We had 1 week at the permission of the Hackensack Water Company to go in, dig up what we could, and get out. So here's a map of the Hackensack River. It begins up here in Rockland County and comes down. And I think you can see one of the reasons why it has its name of River of the Many Bends. In the 1890s, some of the artists in what is called the Hudson River School of Art, which was America's first great art movement, came from the other side of the Hudson to this side and did paintings. This is by a famous artist named Jasper Cropsey. Doesn't quite look like the Meadowlands as we know it today. But at the time, in the 1890s, there still existed, as you can see from this map, a lot of the Atlantic white cedars. We don't have many of the cedars left because almost all of them were cut down and used in roads. I found this picture today. It shows the river with one of the schooners, or actually two of the schooners on the river. And there was an article that was about New Bridge, but this is obviously not New Bridge. Anybody have an idea where it might be? Peter, can you unmute them for a moment? I'm going to have to track this down. I'm wondering whether this is one of the bridges by Hackensack. Now some pictures of the river.
Yeah. I have to unmute myself. If you want, if you have suggestions where that is, maybe type it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. And I saw this one day as I was wandering along. If you look closely in the background, you'll see one of the radio towers in Hackensack. I've been told it's a juvenile cormorant. This is part of the river that not too many people have paddled. I think most of you realize it's the old Hackensack Water Company filtration plant, one that was built around 1889. And if you are on the other side of it, coming up from River Edge in New Milford, you can go under a few bridges and then swing around and you come in here to the backside of the plant. So here's the western spur of the turnpike. And here's part of the eastern spur. I know many of us have been in these areas, so I just wanted to give you a preview of what will be coming this spring when we can go out again. This is from one of the trips we had with the railroad bridge in Secaucus. A few of the other club members heading up towards the railroad bridge. And Laurel Hill is another part of the geology. It's probably connected beneath the surface with the Palisades. This was extensively quarried back in the 19th century, and then the 20th century, they quarried again and used it for underneath the New Jersey Turnpike. Nice quiet day in the Meadowlands. This is one of the radio towers or telephone transmission towers. And here's one of the back areas of the Meadowlands. These need no explanation, of course. The Amtrak Bridge and the eastern spur of the turnpike. This is pretty much the end of the Hackensack River that we can paddle on, just north of the filtration plant. Okay, anybody want to try to guess what this is?
Broccoli.
Nope, it's solid.
Wow. It's green. Copper,
Copper.
is it?
It's copper. Reason I have it is that most people don't realize that North Jersey was where we had the first copper mining in North America. These are the remnants of what was called the Schuyler Mine in North Arlington in the 1940s.
Yeah, we had copper mines in North Arlington, that's right.
And there's a lot of interesting history with it. But it was the piece of copper that first tipped off people that there was something there. It was actually discovered by a slave. Of Aaron Schuyler. And in order to work it after they dug out most of the stuff at the surface, they had to go deeper. The groundwater would come into the mine. So in order to pump the mine out, the first pump was smuggled into North America because the colonists were not allowed to produce copper. But this was the first steam engine in North America. And I think many of us remember when Secaucus was equal to pig farms.
Yep.
You know why they made the pig farms in Secaucus? You know where most of this scrap food came from, the pigs? This is what was left over from the New York City restaurants.
Wow.
They would take it from the city to Secaucus, feed the pigs, butcher the pigs, and send them back to New York City restaurants. So that ended in the 1970s. Secaucus has a lot of other things now, but not the pigs anymore. And this, of course, is the bridge that saved the country. This is New Bridge. This one dates back to 1889. It was an earlier bridge, as we'll see in some paintings in a moment. And I think most of us, if you haven't had a chance yet, paddle around, go past the Van Steuben house. Van Steuben didn't live here during the Revolution. He came afterwards when it was given to him as a present from the grateful country. And the story behind it is that in November 1776, Washington took his army and they crossed the old bridge on their way to Pennsylvania. They were coming from White Plains, which is where I taught for many years. And there were about 15,000 fighting troops and 25,000 troops altogether. Many of them had been injured or were ill by November after they started fighting in August of 76. But Washington decided to retreat across New Jersey. He left a few of his troops to preserve the bridge. This is another painting, what's called the Outposted New Bridge. That was the old oak bridge. And these members of Washington's army were able to hold off the British as they chased Washington long enough so that he was able to get across New Jersey. I haven't tracked down yet to find out whether any of these people who were killed are buried in the old Revolutionary War Cemetery in Dumont, but I'm going to try to do that soon. Can't have a talk about the river without the Ling. I know we once had several members of the club paddle up to the Ling, but I couldn't find those pictures. And this is starting to talk about the future. There have been various studies to see what would happen as sea level rises. If we had a 1 foot rise in sea level, means we're likely to have some severe flooding in the Meadowlands communities once every 7 years. There are various maps which try to predict what would happen in terms of elevation. And parts of Moonachie and Karlstad and the towns in the Meadowlands would certainly be underwater for a while if sea level rises, which it's pretty certain to do. One of the major things that's helped the river, as we all know, is the river keeper. They've done an excellent job of bringing attention to the river and doing things to help clean up the river. I'm going to finish with a few slides of some of the things I've seen while I've been out there, like this little snapping turtle. I haven't seen any like this for a few years, so I don't know whether they're now gone, or whether I just haven't been fortunate enough to see them. But one day I found this one sunning itself on the log. And another day I found some on a mudflat area in New Milford. So we've got a very interesting river. And I think we're going to keep hold of it for a while, but it is going to change. Okay, I'm going to stop my share now. Do we have any questions?
Okay,
I have
so
a
just,
Oops.
so I was just going to remind people that you, unless you've unmuted yourself, you're unmute. You are muted. So find that unmute button if you want to ask a question, or there's the chat area that you can type into if you prefer that. So, so thanks, Mike. And so what questions?
Mike, you were
Yes.
talking about the copper mines off North Arlington,
Right.
and you said there was a slave, did you say?
Yeah, we had
Who-
slavery in Bergen County, and it was the slave that found the first piece of copper and brought it to his master.
And his name you said was Schuyler?
The master's name was Aaron Schuyler.
So is that where Schuyler Avenue came from?
Yes,
Ah,
he
That's
owned
interesting.
about 20,000 acres.
wow.
At that time, people owned large acres.
'Cause
Betty,
I
do
grew
you
up
have
in North Arlington and we had Schuyler Avenue running along there for years and years and never knew where the name came from.
That's who Schuyler was. He came down from the Albany area. He was part of the old Dutch
Hmm.
aristocracy. Okay, Betty, did you have a question?
Well, tell us more about the status of the Ling, because I think, wasn't it vandalized a couple years
Yes,
ago?
just looking at it. About 2 or 3 years ago, 5 people who have been charged at this point with vandalism snuck in and they stole various things, and they apparently did something which allowed the water to leak into the sub, so it's now stuck on the bottom. And it's going to cost several $100,000 to pump it out and move it someplace. If they ever find a place to move it.
Well, I hope they're charged and
Well,
the
they have
law.
charged people, but there's a question of whether they have enough evidence to convict them, because it's been several years now, and I was looking today for a follow-up story about a conviction, and I haven't found anything.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so Mike, going back to your geological experience, geologically, what's unique about the Hackensack?
Well, it runs through a glacial lake, and it starts right at the end of the Palisades near High Tor, and meanders for 45 miles south into Newark Bay. I don't know how much of that is unique, but it's ours.
Yeah. And how do we, you said it at some point, it didn't follow its current course, it diverted. How do we
Now,
know
that was the ancient Hudson River, which.
Oh, the ancient
diverted.
Hudson, right, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. The Hackensack River flows over the ancient Hudson River's course.
Okay, so when at some points when you're on the Hackensack, you're on what at some point was the course of the Hudson.
Yes, you're at least near it. The Hudson River was much deeper, and it's been a lot of stuff that's filled in above the ancient Hudson's course. When they were building Giant Stadium, the original one, it happened to be right where the Hudson cut through. So one of the foundations had to be much deeper than the other side of the stadium.
Interesting.
They found nice things to fill it in with, like Jimmy Hoffa.
And Penn Station.
Okay, other questions?
How did you come to be involved with the Mastodon?
At the time, I was teaching at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and there was a story in the record about it, so I got in touch with the people. And many years ago, I think I did the Mastodon talk for the club. But if you'd like to have the Mastodon talk sometime this spring, we can do that.
Yeah, a couple of people have mentioned that you did that, but I suspect we've also got a good number of members who have joined since then.
Right.
Do you know what happened to the Bergen County Museum? What happened to everything that was in there?
Yes, they lost the lease in Paramus when the county wanted to take over the office building.
Yes.
So they went into the basement to Bergen Mall for a while. And then they lost that lease. So at this point, their art collection and the two mastodons that they have are stored somewhere in a warehouse in central New Jersey.
Oh, boy.
They still have a board of trustees who haven't been willing to relinquish anything. And are still hoping to find a place back in Bergen County where they can reopen the museum.
I'm surprised the county hasn't helped them at all.
Now, the county has its own priorities, so they haven't been able to get much help from the county.
They need a couple good friends.
Need to be friends
Yeah,
with people with a big new mall in the Meadowlands.
I keep hoping to hit the jackpot on the lottery.
Oh, well, yeah.
With my $200 million, I'll start doing some of these things, but so far I haven't been able to pick the right combination. Anybody can help me, let me know.
Good luck.
I'll give you a finder's fee.
Does anyone, remember that picture that Mike said was not the new bridge? Anyone have any suggestions as to what bridge that was?
What's the bridge that goes over the Hackensack into Jersey City that swings like that? Is that a possibility? Wick Penn, is it? No.
Let me bring it up again.
Is it a railroad?
Like when you go out to Fish House Road, there's a bridge that swings just like that. And it goes over to Jersey City from South Kearney.
Is it a road?
I'm wondering whether it's the bridge over by Pagoda, between Pagoda and Hackensack.
Oh, fire.
I agree, because look at the topography of the land. And the river looks fairly narrow.
Well, one of the problems is you can't tell if you're looking upstream or downstream.
That's true.
The one like that in Newark?
There is one like that in Newark on the Passaic River.
Yeah.
I think that's where the ling is on the right side. It's not there in this picture, but where the ling is, this is the
Yeah,
Pagoda
this
Bridge,
is the Pagoda Bridge.
and that's a
And the
swing
link would have been
bridge.
right here.
Oh, it's on. Oh, this is looking north then.
I'm thinking so. I like to orient myself that way, but I'm not certain.
Is it,
Got this from the Bergen County Historical Society website, and they had it listed as the bridge at New Bridge. But it's obviously not the bridge at New Bridge. Because that goes right up against the land on both sides.
is it a railroad bridge?
Pardon?
Is it a railroad train?
No, I don't think it was a train bridge.
But it's interesting. It's got what looks like telegraph poles on each side that have been, 3 have been strapped together to raise above the height of the boat masts.
Yeah, it does have some interesting, very high poles here.
So, I mean, just in terms of dating the picture, that might be of some help because presumably it's after the introduction of the telegraph. But
Right.
it's,
What's interesting is the use of the schooners on the river.
Yeah.
We don't think there would be that much wind, but they were very important in the days before the railroads took over.
Well, similar to the Hudson River sloops, and also schooners are on the Hudson River. They depended to a great extent on the tides.
Right.
When there wasn't wind, you'd anchor when the tides were going the way you didn't want to go, and then weigh anchor when the tides go in the direction you wanted to go.
so the,
One of the nice things about kayaks, we can ignore the tides,
well,
assuming we
Up
can
to a
get into the
point.
water.
yeah, it's interesting just looking at this because the bridge looks like it has the kind of technology that would only have come in around the time of the railroads. I mean, to have a heavy rotating bridge with that truss structure. But
Yeah, that would also be around the time of the railroads, but
it
there was
again,
still
looks
a
like
lot
it
of
had the
river
telegraph,
traffic
but
for a while after that.
yeah, but the carrying is being done by the schooners, and the bridge itself is probably, I mean, the abutment on the right, you know, where it's coming up to the swing part of the bridge, that doesn't look like a heavy enough structure to support a railroad.
Right, I'm gonna see whether I can make it larger and see whether there.
I'm zooming
car.
in. There's cars on the bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks like cars and trucks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So it's early, you know, it's 20th century, but fairly early,
It
presumably.
could be, yes. On the Bergen County Historical Society website, they had a picture of New Bridge, the old one,
Yeah,
we know, with the last cars going over it.
You think
Which
it's a
was in
car
19
and just not a cart or some animal pulling the cart?
yeah, it's hard to tell. Yeah, yeah, that could be that could be a sort of white horse or something
Yeah.
over on the right. It's just
Too fuzzy, too fuzzy.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting picture. They just put it up there without any information other than an incorrect location.
That's about all I got from them, but you can go to the Bergen County Historical Society website. I also I forgot to show those because I came to the last slide I was going to show about the river. But if anybody's interested, I have more information and activities on my Earth2Class website. So if you have a place to write it down.
Yeah, and I'll send that out other than the first minute or two because I was slow in pushing the record button. I'm recording this presentation, so I will send out
Okay.
a link to that recording in a day or two, and I
Good.
can include in the email the link to that presentation as a clickable link.
Right. And then we also have links to the River Keeper and the Meadowlands Environmental Center. So since the 1970s, we've come a very long way from what the river was.
Yeah, so Martin, you can speak to how it was when the club was started, right?
Martin?
I haven't heard that in a while.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. Yeah, in the first year of the club's existence, we got together and lashed canoes together. And we put up 20-foot poles with canoe symbols on it and numbered. So we created actually a canoe trail through Kingsland Creek and what's the other one down there? Sawmill Creek. And made up a little brochure, which we eventually, after 3 or 4 years, we handed over to the local Boy Scout troop to maintain, but they never did. And as we found out years later, through frost heave and everything, all those 20-foot pressure treated poles were all pulled up, and we only found 1 or 2 markers left. And I got one in my shed still, believe it or not. And so I think years later, a decade later, the Environmental Commission down there kind of rejuvenated the canoe trail and made new brochures. I'm not really sure because I haven't followed up on it, in the last 15 years or so. But yeah, we put in the first canoe trail in there back in 1985.
Yeah. For the Sawmill Creek, there is a fancy printed in PDF brochure.
In Mill Creek, you mean?
Mill Creek. I think that's the one. If I'm not confusing 2 different locations, Betty, you'd know, right?
Yeah, it's on the Secaucus side.
Right. One of my cousins is somewhat responsible for that. He was working for Hart's Mountain,
Oh, yeah.
and they wanted to get an exit from the New Jersey Turnpike,
Oh,
but you weren't allowed to have an exit to go into private property or commercial property. So my cousin came up with the idea of making a park. And that's how they got the exit 17, I think.
So you put a little park there and have an exit to the park, and then it just happens
Right.
to lead on to your property.
Yeah,
Pretty sneaky.
my cousin did quite well out of Hart's Mountain. They did well out of him. Okay, well, good to see many of you and meet many of you, as I haven't been around for a while. But hope to see you all out on the water.
Thanks for your talk.
Thanks,
thank you.
thanks, Mike. We'll
Everybody know where to get into the river?
There's a lot of launch spots.
Right.
Jump off one of those bridges.
Just watch the tide because the black muck will really, gobble you up.
Yeah, it's not the sort that you want to use for a health spa.
No.
No. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Mike. That was great. And thanks everyone for joining. What I'm going
Thank
to
you all.
do now, they said
Like this.
when I find the right button, I'm going to, yes.